What is going on, y'all? It is the Caveman coming at you with a brand new podcast, the Against the Blitz podcast. And I'm super excited to bring this one to you guys with my co-host, Football with Oz. What is going on, y'all? It is the Caveman coming at you with a brand new football podcast, Football with Oz. Would you believe this is like the fourth time attempting this intro to this brand new pod? But I'm so damn excited to be doing this, talking football with my new friend, Football with Oz. Austin, I'm so glad that you're joining me to co-host this pod. It's going to be a blast as we run through these episodes.
Yeah, thank you for having me, first of all. I had a quick, short start on TikTok, but now that TikTok's kind of coming to an end, I'm really, really excited to kind of get this thing going and just spew as much rambling football knowledge as I possibly can. So let's get it going.
Yeah, I was noticing your TikToks a few months ago, and the knowledge that you were putting on your slideshows, the type of content you were doing, genuinely was standing out. You grew your following quick for a reason, and the same thought I had was with TikTok coming to an end, it's gotta be distributed somewhere else, and I'm happy that we were able to build a connection quick and get this going pretty much in a week. So this is impressive in itself that we've even gotten this far, given that we kind of only have met in the last 7 days or so. So this is exciting. This is real exciting.
We met at the right time, right as the playoffs are coming in. We had a Wildcard weekend, which, in your words, really was not that wild. We've had maybe one good game. We had our predictions down. We might go over them. We might not, but because they're kind of embarrassing. Some, but we're just gonna go over these games, go over what we think happened, what we saw happened. It'll be fun.
Yes, it's going to be a blast, and it's probably going to be a long one, so we're going to just strap ourselves in and get right into it. As Austin said, it was not the most wild card weekend, and our predictions, and I will speak for myself, were not too hot. It started with a Chargers and Houston game that, in our defense, a lot of people didn't really think too hard about. Just kind of slammed the ball through the hoop with the Chargers and called it a day and moved on to the next prediction. But, that game was, at least in hindsight, definitely a lot closer than a lot of people gave it credit for. And CJ Stroud proved a point.
Yeah. I feel like this is kind of what we're used to from a Greg Roman playoff game where you have a run game foundation as the Chargers offense, and they're just airing it out from the beginning. And they tried to run, it didn't work. And the hypothetical man, Justin Herbert, he did bad. But the help he had, aside from Ladd McConkey, was grade Fs across the board. Who else had drops that led to interceptions? I know one went through Ladd's hands, kinda. Disley had the really bad one. So you have 4 picks, but you can kind of have question marks about the 2. The bad one was the throw to Johnston, but you can't put the whole game on Herbert. It kind of feels like the Twitterverse is doing. But what'd you see from what Houston did that led to
the way I thought about it and kind of what I was alluding to before, this game, hindsight wise, it really was a matchup. It was the matchup, I should say, that made this game what it ended up being. And I think on paper, the Chargers, not on paper, let me start over. This game rightfully was in favor of the Chargers going into it. They were the better team. They had been the better team. But the fact of the matter is, matchup is so important in the NFL, and it was a bad matchup for the Chargers. The Texans, despite struggling for the back half of the season, still are one of the best run defenses in football. I think they finished 7th in EPA per play allowed on the ground, to close out the year. So that's already fighting, against Los Angeles. And then, as long as those guys were able to get stingy up front, then you're leaving Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter up against, Ladd McConkey and the clown show. So it really became just, a tee-off fest on Justin Herbert once J.K. Dobbins couldn't get anything going. And, Herbert wasn't perfect, but like I said, I think the matchup just was so bad in hindsight that nobody really gave the Texans credit for that and just how they stacked up against the Chargers unit per unit.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it just comes from like the lack of confidence in Stroud at this point. I mean, if this was a game last year with the same supporting cast, but like the way Stroud was playing last year, I think that like our opinions would have been pretty different. But he's just been so down this year that like I thought that there was no way that what he was producing like the entire regular season would happen in the playoffs. And like he wasn't perfect, but like the defense stepped up heavy. Having Joe Mixon there was humongous because like the Chargers couldn't stop the run. I don't know how many like yards he ended up with. I know it was a couple over 100. Touchdown. He was plenty efficient. Like they just didn't really have any sort of answer. And I think pairing that with the Chargers' hot start to get down the field and not ending up with a touchdown, they recovered a fumble in like scoring territory, and they ended up with 6 points on 3 drives down there. So like that's by far the worst thing you can possibly do to start off a playoff game. Except the Packers, which comes later.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, seriously, the Packers, they stepped out on the wrong foot, and then just every step they took, they stepped on another nail. But you know, you hit the nail on the head with that. That point too is it felt like the Chargers just started off so well. Things were going the way that everyone thought they would go. CJ Stroud threw still one of the most confusing interceptions I think I saw all weekend. I mean, he like, it looked like he hit the wrong button in Madden or something, and it ended up lofting to the wrong side of the field. And, you know, one of the Chargers, like 3rd or 4th string DBs ended up with that ball on the sideline. And, you know, everyone was like, yeah, this is what the Texans have looked like. No one's surprised. And it took a botched snap on 3rd and 16 for CJ Stroud to make the best play he's made in God knows how long. And he flicked a switch from there. But to your point too, I didn't think Stroud was necessarily lights out either. I mean, Herbert's interceptions just set the defense up in some rough spots. And, you know, I'm not even going to go as far as to say that the Texans always capitalized, but they did take advantage. And they just buried the Chargers in the hole that they dug themselves. So it was a shocking game, but as I was getting to before, all we really needed was CJ Stroud to play, halfway decent. And, you know, the result doesn't seem that surprising after the fact.
No. And like, this is kind of like exactly what I wanted to see like when DeMeco Ryans took over as head coach. Was like, just like you have Stroud, you have these Nico Collins of the world, like you have the capabilities to win a shootout, but you also have like trenches, you have physicality, you have defense. And that's something like I feel like that was missing from the Texans teams of like the Watson, the good Watson era. It was like they would be in these shootouts, but they were missing something. I think that's like what DeMeco Ryans has brought to this team, especially being such a good former linebacker. Like he was a tough dude. So like I'm so happy they got him. As someone who's not a Texans fan, like I've been rooting for him heavy. And look, like in hindsight, I am ashamed of myself for not having the balls to pick them. I didn't think hard enough. I really had faith in Herbert, but that was bad on my part.
No, I mean, same here. I don't. Yeah. I would go as far as to argue that the Texans winning and blowing them out the way they did was, you know, a bigger upset than maybe any other game we saw this weekend, except for maybe the blowout we saw here on Monday night. But I mean, I really don't think many people had the Texans. I would like to see, you know, some sort of an official count from the sports books or something. I feel like it was a heavy Charger majority as far as game picks go.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching it on my way home. If there's any law enforcement listening, I'm kidding. But before I got home, I was kind of listening to it. I heard the Chargers were just down in their territory. And then I take a few minutes to come inside. I turn the TV on the game, and the Texans are up. And they have every ounce of momentum coming into halftime. Like the second that halftime hit, like it felt like the Texans had already won. And the score was close at that point. I don't remember the exact score at halftime, but it was close. But it felt like the Chargers were already defeated. And it felt like Houston had already won. Like in their on their faces, their body language, like they had won that game mentally by halftime. And I think that's everything.
Yeah, they had a ton of momentum that the Texans did going into the half. I think what ended up happening was I'm looking at the play-by-play now. So the Texans ended the half with a field goal to go up 10-7 after forcing a 3-and-out under 1 minute. They forced a 3-and-out on Los Angeles under 1 minute, drove the field and kicked a field goal, ton of momentum. And they ended up fumbling actually coming out of half. Like their momentum kind of got shut down. I forgot Joe Mixon had dropped that ball. And that was when I was like, okay, here's where it's gonna, kind of swim back into Charger momentum. And they ended up turning it over on downs. And, like you said, the Texans just kind of kept rolling. They didn't let it stymie them at all.
Yeah. I mean, it felt like it's at a certain point, like they could not get anything to swing their way. I mean, I don't remember how many yards, but like a bomb to Ladd McConkey, a huge play. And it ended up in like a net 4-point game.
Literally.
Because they gave up like a kick too. Like it was the weirdest play where the ball got tipped straight up and the kicker, I don't know what actually he was thinking. I think he thought he was a quarterback and there was a batted pass and he just swatted it down into the waiting arms of a defender. And just it was like nothing after that point could go their way. There was no shot.
Yeah, I mean, if they had any chance to come back, that was the play that was going to spring it, and they completely just, shot it in the back of the head the second that the drive ended, and it just sucks because the two of us, to my understanding, we're Charger Herbert supporters. I will go as far as to say. And the internet, this will re-spark the whole Herbert war. Emmanuel Acho is going to make his reemergence on Twitter and television, and we're all going to want to rip our nails out again. But, this doesn't, and I know this is a very controversial topic, but this still doesn't, impact Herbert's stock that much to me in terms of the quarterback, the quarterback leaderboard, if you will. Like, who are we? I haven't seen enough from anyone else to take this matchup, drop Herbert down, and then vault other guys in front of him. It wasn't pretty, but I still all of the excuses are still valid. He didn't play good, but there are still things that got in the way that are valid, whether people want to accept that or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not someone that was like insanely high. Like I didn't have him at the top 4. Like it's Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, and Burrow to me. And they're comfy up there. But I had Herbert right there, like right outside that line. Him and Stafford were right there for me. And I don't think that like one bad playoff game is just going to just drop you 4 spots and everyone waiting for him to play a bad game. Be like, oh, see, I knew it all along. He chokes. He doesn't have it. He's if man. And like, it's funny to me, like calling him if man, calling him hypothetical man. It's funny. But like his team hasn't been good enough really for him to be able to prove himself in the playoffs that much. They had the bad game against Jacksonville, but like he had a good half a game that game. Like I'm not going to hold 2 games in his career against him over a full body of work.
Yep.
Like it takes a little bit more for me than like 2 games to define your career.
Right. And to that exact point, I was arguing with one of my buddies about how, he's texted me like a list of quarterbacks he would argue are better than Justin Herbert. And I gave him credit because he did mention Jared Goff, and the way he's played, he's been lights out. You could talk about the environment and the supporting cast and Ben Johnson, etc. It helps. He's been lights out. He deserves credit for that. But Jared Goff is a guy that was just a part of a massive collapse in the NFC Championship game last year. Jared Goff is a guy that, back with Los Angeles and Sean McVay put up 3 points in the Super Bowl. So, all of these guys that you can argue are better than Stafford or deserve to be in that 5-6 spot above Herbert, not Stafford. They've all had their moments too. And I think at the end of the day, next year, assuming Los Angeles goes and gets a big boundary guy and, the defense is still up to par, the offensive line is still playing good football, and Herbert plays like how he did this year, next year, I think that is when that'll be the put up or shut up year. And I know people are getting sick of hearing that, but assuming that the offseason goes the way it should, that's where I think the real judgment of Justin Herbert can be made.
Yeah. And I think like people hold playoff success so near and dear to like what makes you a good player. But I still don't think that I've ever been able to comfortably say that he has the supporting cast of a playoff winning team. He's had a good enough supporting cast when you had prime Keenan Allen and good Mike Williams. Eckler was doing his thing, but the defense was atrocious.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was not a playoff winning defense. And if they won, it was because he carried them and the offense carried them. And how they are right now, aside from Ladd McConkey and a good tackle duo, they are not a playoff offense. If you have Quentin Johnston starting, that's not a good sign. Their interior O-line's a little shaky. I mean, their weapons outside of Ladd McConkey are nothing. Like I don't remember how many yards the rest of them had compared to Ladd McConkey's almost 200, but like it was thin. So I don't think that the Chargers losing is necessarily a travesty when like I don't think that the rest of the roster outside of Herbert is a playoff winning roster.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the second leading pass catcher in terms of receiving was Will Dissly, who had a massive drop early in the game on an insane throw that would have converted a third down, and then also had that drop for a pick that almost went for a pick six. He had 2 catches for 16 yards on 5 targets. The next leading receiver was Tucker Fisk, who made a great catch, to his credit, on that crazy throw from Herbert early in the game for 15 yards. After that, it was DJ Chark, 1 for 10. Darius Davis, 1 for 4. J.K. Dobbins had 1 target, no receptions. Hassan Haskins had a target, no receptions. And your boy Quentin Johnston had 5 targets, not a single grab, and 1 target that went for an interception. So, you know, the excuses are valid, whether people want to admit it or not. Yeah. And the thing about Justin Herbert, too, for me is outside of the playoff lack of success, he has proven to me he can be a quarterback he can be a different type of quarterback depending on what the offense needs. To the point you mentioned with prime Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, you know, he was guns blazing, leading this offense to 30+ scoring games consistently. You know, he lit the league up. He's passed for 30+ touchdowns a couple times already, so he can do that. This year, he was asked to manage the game, and he did it better than really a lot of other people would, especially given the circumstances that Los Angeles put him in. You know, I won't say nobody, but they broke preseason expectations, made the playoffs. He only threw 3 interceptions, had the lowest amount of turnovers in the league. So, you know, you can only ask this guy to do so much, and he has 1 bad game and everyone wants to tear down the kingdom. But to me, he's proven that he can be such a versatile quarterback depending on the system. And that's a question we always ask ourselves. Like, what if we put, you know, Justin Herbert in this offense, or what if we put Joe Burrow over here? It's like, well, now we've seen Justin Herbert in a offense with a bad number 1 offense with a bad defense, and he lit it up. And now he's here in B offense with, you know, a game management type of role, and he was able to do that and be efficient and protect the ball in that way too. So if anything, you could almost argue he's proven a whole nother reason why he should be in that top 5-6 conversation still.
Yeah, and like kind of what you were saying earlier is like you can drop them all you want, but who are you going to put up there? Because like the only QBs that are really finding like proper playoff success that are carrying their teams are the guys that are already up there, like Burrow, Allen, Mahomes. Like these are the guys that have actually like taken their team pretty far and played well in those games, but they're already above him. So like I don't know, other than maybe Jalen Hurts, what QBs have played well in the playoffs recently and had team success. And even then, Hurts won a convincing game and he threw for 130 yards? Like that's a luxury. Like Herbert does not have the luxury of being able to throw for 130 yards and win a playoff game. It just wasn't going to happen. He's a gunslinger. He is responsible for almost all the points on his offense going forward. Like if J.K. Dobbins can't run, like he is going to have to carry this offense. And he tried. Like they tried the Dobbins experiment in the playoff game. It didn't work. He was shut down immediately, and he had to play hero ball, and it didn't work. Like it just didn't work. But I'm not going to hold that against him. Like the stats don't tell the full story, and like that's kind of what I was going to lead into Russell Wilson in the Pittsburgh game. Is that I think Russell Wilson didn't play as good of a game, in my opinion, as some of his stats showed.
Yeah, his EPA in the game was actually a pretty higher number than I expected it to be when I went and looked. It just for the Steelers, it just, you get off on such a bad foot early on by, going 3-and-out early and then allowing a 95-yard touchdown drive for 7 points. Like, that's demoralizing. Going 3-and-out again. It just, a guy like Russell Wilson, he's not going to rally the troops. He's not going to lead a lightning fast. Well, let's put it this way. The Steelers aren't going to lead a lightning fast drive that scores in response to a drive that Baltimore had. And yeah, I mean, I was surprised also to see Russell's EPA as, I think it was like 0.67 or something like that, which was one of the higher numbers of the weekend, but they probably got beat the worst. Well, yeah, honestly, that honestly might be up for debate right now, but they were definitely one of the beatings.
Yeah. It's just watching a Russell Wilson game. When he hits the backstep in his drop, you know exactly where the ball's going. It is either going deep that way or it is going to the flat. Like, he just did not have access to the middle of the field whatsoever, except apparently on 3rd and longs when he would hit a 4-yarder to Freiermuth and they'd have to punt and they'd have to punt again. Like, it just didn't feel like they had any control of what their offense was doing the entire game. And the only times they got those yards that probably boosted his EPA were those the few times they got Brandon Stevens in a one-on-one and they beat him every time. But aside from that, the game was toast.
Yeah, and I mean, George Pickens definitely gave him a nice helping hand on that one deep ball that he did, like a spinorama around the second defensive back after beating the first one. Like, it was a very on par game for the way the Ravens had been playing and for the way that the Steelers had been playing. And like I said, as a Bills fan, unfortunately, I was hoping for the upset, but this is the greatest zone read offense in Baltimore that we've ever seen, between the best, pound for pound runner in the NFL, the physical closer, and then Lamar, who is, he's Lamar Jackson. And I feel bad for any defense, including the Bills next week. It's like sitting on the couch watching the broadcast and trying to figure out which of them have the fucking ball when Lamar puts it in Derek's lap, and it's like, who has it? Like, it takes us from the couch 2 or 3 seconds to even figure it out, let alone the guys in the second level in the secondary to figure out through bodies, through traffic. And by that point, they're either in your face and you have to suddenly make a tackle on 2 of the hardest guys in the entire NFL to get, or you're not even in the play because you're like, oh shit, they're on the other side of the field right now. So, I wanted to give the Steelers the benefit of the doubt, because if there was one defense that at their best could shut them down, it would be them. But even they looked defeated, demoralized. They got ran through. It was a true testament to where the Steelers are at right now, but also just how good the Ravens are, and the way that Lamar and Henry are just manipulating and dominating with the ball in their hands.
Yeah. And like, I know that there was like a stigma at some point, and it was true that the Ravens' pass defense was bad at one point, but Nate Wiggins kind of taking over the Brandon Stevens role in the perimeter, and Ardarius Washington taking over Marcus Williams. Like, Ardarius Washington has been incredible. Like, every Ravens game that I've tuned into, he has made at least half of the plays that I've watched. He is like 5'8", but he is just like a ball of energy. And he has, like, almost single-handedly with Nate Wiggins flipped this pass defense on its head. So now, like, seeing that, like, I don't see really any glaring weaknesses. Certainly not on offense. I mean, they ran read option, like, how many times on the same drive? Like 5? They had a full touchdown drive where they didn't even pass the ball, really. Like, it was demoralizing. And, like, I mean, I feel for Patrick Queen and anyone that had to try and make decisions, like you were saying. I had no clue who had the ball on half of his reads. So, yeah, I didn't see an avenue for Pittsburgh winning that game after watching the first drive. They weren't in it. It just couldn't happen.
Yeah, And that was the harsh reality I quickly realized after the grave mistake I had made. And, going back on the MVP conversation and how back and forth that's been between Josh and Lamar. And at this point, it does seem like a closed case because Lamar got AP1, all pro first team. So it does seem like there's a chosen winner. But I guess as unstoppable as Lamar looked and, watching him in that first half against Pittsburgh and the way I described it, play as if he had the Mario Kart star power up, like just invincible. Anybody that tried to touch him bounced off of him, or he just ran by them. He looked so good. But the thing that I feel like is on one hand unfair, but also a fair criticism that he's gotten docked for in the MVP conversation is just having Derrick Henry, like half of like the manipulation factor that Henry brings in.
Yeah.
Is just so powerful. And in the second half, I went back and looked at the impact statistically that both of them had. Lamar had 10 touches, which were including just dropbacks and rush attempts. He had 10 touches, quarterback touches for 49 yards in the entire second half. Henry had 13 for 86 and a touchdown. So even when the Steelers started to like show some signs of life, all they did was turn to Derrick and say, hey, close this out for us. And he did just that. I mean, the dagger was that just heartbreaking 44-yard run. He just hits the gap and the dude is gone. He's running downhill at a faster rate than anyone his size should. And it just is so killer. But that's what Lamar has the luxury of that no other quarterback has. And I do think it is fair to dock him for that in the MVP conversation. But that's not to say he doesn't deserve it because phenomenal play. He's been phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not one to try and like always predict who I think is going to win the Super Bowl, but like confidently early, like my prediction would be the Ravens. And that's because you have a guy who is the MVP favorite, AP All-Pro first team, maybe best quarterback in the world right now. And they don't really even need him half the time. Like they have Derrick Henry just dominating. Todd Monken, when he wants to, it can be in his bag. And he will have Rashad Bateman deep, Isaiah Likely underneath, Zay Flowers on a screen. Like they have legit playmakers. Mark Andrews, Justice Hill is phenomenal as a receiver. Like they have actual really, really, really good players that aren't Lamar Jackson that can win them games. So then when he's hot, no one stands a chance. No one stood a chance. And that's part of the reason why I was so confused personally, why Mike Tomlin all of a sudden is getting the fire questions. Because I get it from previous years, totally. But I don't know really what he was supposed to do this game to stop that. Because I don't think that Pittsburgh going into the game had the personnel to do it based off how hot Baltimore's been.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the first time I'll disagree. I just feel like to that same point that Tomlin couldn't do anything, as true as that is, the small things that were in his control, he completely fumbled. I mean,
yeah, he did.
All he had to do was give his team a chance, but he waved the white flag so early on. I mean, I can't imagine how fucking frustrating it had to be 35-year-old Cam Hayward and have to go back out there to try and stop that because your offense couldn't sustain more than a 5-play drive. I mean, I went back and looked at the offensive drive times in the first half. I don't think the Steelers sustained a drive that was longer than like 3:02. Like it was literally just around the average, like 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And who knows? Maybe they don't convert on 4th and 2 or 4th and inches, but at least try. So it just from my perspective, rooting for the Steelers as hard as I was, it really blew my mind that a veteran coach like him didn't understand the circumstances, and know that you're never going to have a chance to beat them. Yeah. If you're going to play with your tail tucked between your legs. And I think this is just another brick on top of the what the hell is Mike Tomlin doing house or chimney, because we can go back to, and I did a little bit of refreshing my mind with Mike Tomlin, because up to this game, I would have told you no chance that Mike Tomlin should be fired, and I would never be open to it. But He's 8-11 in his postseason career now. He's 0-5 in the last 8 years. And I think personnel-wise, he hasn't had the best signal callers, but he's also had a hand in that. Like, he has a major, say in who is the quarterback. And it goes back to when in 2021, if you remember, they played the Browns in the wild card, and they were down 35-7, 35-10 going into half. Big Ben threw 4 picks that game. Like, the guy was genuinely, like, he was cooked. We all knew it. And what did they do? Big Ben wanted to keep playing. Mike Tomlin didn't have the heart to say, dude, no, you're fucking cooked, bro.
Yeah.
And then they go and run the same season. That was when it all that's when this all started the tumbleweed downhill. Is they brought Big Ben back. They went above 500 despite, a questionable season. I think they finished 9-7 or whatever. And they got blown out by the Chiefs in the wild card the next year. And then it's just started ever since.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how frustrating it would be. I mean, they've had good teams and they've made the playoffs a lot, but they haven't won a playoff game since La La Land was in theaters. Like, that is so tough. Like, the last time you won a playoff game, Obama was still president.
Yeah.
Like, that's absurd. Like, so I get it. I really do. But, like, just that game specifically, I do agree. He was ballless. Like, there was the 4th and inches was really the one that made me think, like there were a few where he punted where I'm like, he could have punted, he could have gone for it. But if you go for it and you miss, you lose. So there was a few that I understood, but the 4th and inches, I think it was like a pass to Freiermuth where he got like hit on the line, and they marked him short. But you have Najee, you have Warren, like, you have a team that's built to get a yard. All right, like, they are not built to be like a powerhouse. They're built to get a yard or 2 or 3, and not going for it when all you needed was an inch was bad. Like, that was not a good showing from Mike Tomlin by any means. But, like, I think if there's any game where I can say he could have done better, 1,000%. But, like, what Baltimore was doing, I don't see a lot of teams stopping that, like, at all. So I totally get just being in over your head. Like, I don't think you should, like, concede that early, kind of like how it felt he did. But, man, it like, watching the first 2-3 drives of the game, like, they had no chance.
Yeah.
So I do get it. I get it from a standpoint of he could have absolutely managed the game better, especially with the 4th and inches. That was awful. But, like, man, I think that Pittsburgh was just in over their head playing Baltimore round 1. Like, it was just a bad draw. It's a really bad draw.
Yeah. Do you think so? Let's say going back to where it started with this mediocre streak. Do you think how much do you credit or discredit him for the way, like, the drafting of Kenny Pickett went, but more importantly, how the whole Matt Canada saga went down, like how controversial that was? Like, these are things that I look at on his resume. And I think like, at what point does this have to change from the top? And then this offseason, the solutions were Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, who I went on record happily. And I don't think I was too far off given the way the season ended. I didn't even say we're top 32 quarterbacks in football. So like, and he made it work, which is what he does. But, it just is, there's a clear ceiling with him. And there's, I just think he's a good culture guy. Like, if we took him and put him in New York right now, replaced Brian Dable with the way, Joe Shane's running that clown show. If you brought him over there to try to shift that culture around, or Chicago, he probably is able to rebuild it from the ground up, get the most out of the players like he always has. And I think that's the type of environment he would thrive best in. But getting a team into the postseason as a true threat, I don't think he's got that anymore.
I don't think so. No. So then, and that's part of, like, why I struggled so much deciding if he deserves to be fired or not, because I do agree, like, it could be very mutually beneficial to part ways. But I look at what he does with every free agent that they bring in, every rookie. Like, they had Zach Frazier, Fontenot was injured, unfortunately, but they brought in Deshaun Elliott in free agency, Peyton Wilson as a draft pick. They traded for Dante Jackson. Like, every single player that they brought in, except for the quarterbacks, really balled out. So, like, I feel like he can elevate the players that he's given. So I think part of it is the personnel building. I'm with you. Like getting Matt Canada, Arthur Smith is a ceiling limiter. Like you can't win Super Bowls with them. But like I tried to ask myself the question is like, who could you realistically bring in that could win with that? So that's the thing I've been trying to struggle with is like he could be deserving of being fired, but like for who? And that's the hard part with firing a coach is like you can't just go get Andy Reid. Like you can't just go get the guys that can win them. Like you have to try and find a guy like an Aaron Glenn or do even more homework and go after like a Liam Cohen. Like these are guys you have no clue how they're going to be. And guys like Cam Hayward, who's like, 35, 36, TJ Watt's 31, I think. Like a lot of like your key players they're pretty old. So like if you go into a rebuild, like you don't have your QB of the future, you don't have your coach of the future, like they're gone. And you got to restart. And like that's scary when you're a team on the verge of that.
Yeah, and to your point, I guess on that same note, Tomlin would be the guy you'd want to go into that rebuild. You know, getting a different head coach, whether they're new or not. You know, why would you move on if a rebuild is impending? I guess, yeah. Fine, Tomlin, stay around, rebuild our team. Then. If you're not going to win us a championship, if you're not going to win us a playoff game, then fuck it, blow it all up and, start from the ground up and we'll go from there.
Well,
that's fair.
Well, that's kind of how I felt going into the season. I didn't have expectations for them to win that many games. Like I looked at Russell Wilson as a bridge. Like maybe they saw Fields as their QB of the future. Maybe they just saw him as a low risk, low reward, like super cheap signing. I don't know what they were thinking for their quarterback situation for the future, but I thought of this as like a bridge year. You see what you can do at quarterback next year. Maybe they had a rookie in mind. Maybe they had a free agent or a trade in mind. But I don't think that like the expectation for the Steelers was to go win a playoff game this year. Like it was not like in the AFC North that was supposed to be more competitive than it was. And like just everything that like seemed to be happening culturally in that team, it didn't really feel like they had a lot of juice. And then Arthur Smith and Justin Fields like won every game they played with together, except for maybe one, I don't know. But like they were humming. And it created an expectation, I think, that this team should be winning a playoff game because they won so many games. But I think when you overwin with like mild personnel, it creates expectations that like your players just can't keep up with. And I think if you can make a playoff game in a year that you really weren't even supposed to necessarily, I'd call it a win. I'd say that like without their quarterback of the future, I can't really hold too much against him. Though I will agree with you, his game planning and decision-making in that game was not good. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, you make fair points across the board. It is one of the, and they already announced they're not moving on from him, which I'm not going to say I disagree with. My thought process after that game was I'm now open to the idea of it, which I was completely closed off of on before. But yeah, that was, every point you make is very fair. And I was the biggest Steelers hater going into the season. I was rooting on their downfall because like I said, I made what some people thought were egregious takes on neither quarterback being, starting worthy at all. Like I just did not see a universe where this team was even above 500. So, that still matters. And who knows what the future holds? I'm hoping, honestly, for the sake of their sanity, it is a rebuild because there's just no point in doing this over and over again. But to that same, on that same note, I was going to bring up too how, TJ Watt was just not visible in that game. Like his impact was so noticeable in such a bad way that I think that also spells bad news. Well, depending on how you look at it, it spells news for a potential rebuild because who knows if he even wants to be there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, he's been like their franchise player for the last 5+ years. Like for him not to show up at a playoff game is scary. Like supposedly your best player is just not there. And he was going up. It wasn't like he was going up against a seasoned vet. Like he wasn't going up against Lane Johnson. He had Roger Rosengarten, the second or third round rookie out of Washington. Not even the best prospect from his own team at Washington, and had him in prison. And the week before, he was put in purgatory by the backup guard, Cody Ford. He has not recorded a pass rush statistic in 2 games against mild competition. So like that's really, really scary for a player that did have production wise his worst healthy year in a long time. So I mean, at age 31, I really want to say might say that wrong over and over again, but that's a bad time for a rebuild, is when you have a guy on the way out like Cam Hayward. You have a guy that's young enough at TJ Watt's age to be like a contributing player for the next few years, but if he's on a decline and Cam Hayward's on a decline, like that's a rebuild in my book if you don't have your quarterback.
Yeah, I think TJ Watt has had an argument over the last couple of years to be the most valuable player in football. Mm-hmm. I mean, when this guy's on the field, they have been winning games, and when he's been off the field, they don't. And for him he didn't even have a tackle. He didn't even record a fucking tackle in this game.
No.
So, like, that is damning. If that isn't a sign of a rebuild,
mm-hmm.
I don't know what is. Like, you just got to back it up.
He had a missed tackle. I remember that, but like that's like it's the only thing I saw. But like honestly though, like I do have respect and kudos for picking Pittsburgh anyways, just as like pure optimism, hoping that the Buffalo would play. Because I think Buffalo would spank Pittsburgh again in the playoffs. I think they can put up a fight against Baltimore, though. I do. I really do.
We'll definitely get to that. But oh man, yeah. I will be shitting myself from start to finish. And the last thing I wanted to say about this game mm-hmm. too was the vision I sort of formulated for myself to build up the courage to take Pittsburgh was, and this is something we talked about too, was Zay Flowers being out. Mm-hmm. And the impact that could have on the passing offense in the case that the run game wasn't working for Baltimore. And what we agreed on while watching the game was, actually, it's probably better that Zay is out, because that means more 12 personnel, and that means more fucking Isaiah Likely. And he is arguably better than any skill position player, outside of Derrick Henry or Lamar, of course, on that entire offense. It's a miracle for defenses that he hasn't been out there that much.
That's one thing I will never understand. Like, I feel like this offense is like actively a genius offense. Like, it seems like everything that they do works. So I'm so confused why Isaiah Likely is not getting more playing time, because I'm not going to say he's better than Mark Andrews, but I'm not going to not say he's not better than Mark Andrews. Like, he is a really, really, really good football player, and like I would rather play Zay Flowers than Isaiah Likely, 100%. Comfortably. Yeah,
100%. I mean, Isaiah Likely is a threat at the catch point. He's a threat after the catch. As far as I'm concerned, he does a good enough job, pushing guys downfield to block. Mm-hmm. He's well-rounded, and even if he doesn't do that as well as Mark, I think he's so good with the ball in his hands that it doesn't even matter. Like, he makes up for it. He makes up for that 10 times over. So we saw him stiff arm somebody to the earth's core against Pittsburgh. So that I did want to touch on that quickly, because Likely's been a monster.
Yeah. I mean, when you bring in someone like Zay Flowers, who's 185 pounds, covered in snow, like, that takes away a blocker in a sense. So when you have someone like Isaiah Likely that might not match the receiving production of a Zay Flowers, but if he can get close and act as an actually like really good open space blocker, that just opens up your run game so much more. And it did. Like, the Ravens have been running all year, but like, that was the best rushing attack they've had all season. And that's just kind of what happens when you run so much 12 personnel, especially with a Likely that can and does play from the slot at a high level. Is that like they're like you run out of options on who you want to guard and like who you want the offense to go to. Because Bateman's pretty good. Like, if that's your worst player on the offense, you can't just leave him open in one-on-one situations. Like, I don't know where to start trying to guard this team. And if they bring Isaiah Likely into the mix as a blocker and a receiver, I have no answers for you. None. No idea.
That's what's scary as a Bills fan right now, is just if Monken, for whatever reason, I almost think he's like thinking too much. Like, if he just puts Likely on the field, then it's gonna get dark. But I think we should move on to the next game here. We've been yapping about the Steelers Ravens for a bit now. But the next game was another spanking of a lifetime, but it wasn't the whole time. The Broncos and the Bills. This ended 31-7, but a lot of Bills fans were on the edge of their seat going into the half because 10-7 after a missed field goal from Denver that would have had the game tied. A lot of assholes were quenched. A lot of bunches were on the edge of seats here. So what were your thoughts on this one as it played out through the 60 minutes?
Well, I was scared for you when it started. Like immediately off the rip, Troy Franklin cooks what was a Taylor Rapp for like a 57-yard touchdown, like off the rip. And like it took the Bills drove, but like they weren't scoring touchdowns on all these drives that they were driving on. So they were like it felt like they had Broncos defense on their heels, but like the Broncos were in it. Like they were playing good situational football. Bo Nix looked good for the first half, and like Cortland Sutton made a good grab, but it fell apart. It fell apart pretty quick. And I think part of it also coming from a Buffalo fan is you were just so nervous that the Broncos could be kind of close. But as an outsider, like I feel like the Bills had it like after the first drive pretty comfortably.
I actually agree with you. Like, because I was watching with family, of course, and everyone's kind of freaking out. But honestly, like I was very relaxed personally. Like I try to watch, but I watch Bills games ever since the Bills lost to Mac Jones when he threw 3 passes in the snow. That was the last time I fully invested myself as just a Bills fan and not a football fan. Now I remove like 25% of my Bills fandom and replace it with objective football fan watching, and it has made me such a happier person because that game was the day I almost jumped off my roof. But anyway, I couldn't actually have agreed more. I was relatively relaxed. The offensive line was bullying Zach Allen and Nick Bonito. I mean, it wasn't even fair like what that offensive line was doing, and it was pretty shocking. The defense of Denver, which, eye test wise, you could argue probably wasn't the best all season, but they finished first in EPA per play allowed. So they were good. And the offensive line just took over. James Cook averaged 2.35 yards before contact. Josh was pressured just 12 times, which was the third lowest of any quarterback this weekend. So it was just such a dominating performance that it wasn't so much that we were letting the Broncos hang around. It was more so, when are the Broncos just going to eventually fade out of this? Because it was only going to take one mistake or two on their part, and the wheels were going to fall off. And that's eventually what happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it didn't feel like Buffalo had a positional weakness in this game. Like every single player that played a snap played really, really well, it felt like. And guys like Spencer Brown, I am so happy he's good now. I remember how mad Buffalo fans were at him for so long, and he's good now, and I love it. I was so high on him in the draft too. I was waiting for so long, but like Buffalo, now that they have Matt Milano back, and they have Johnson this game as opposed to the Ravens game, they didn't have either of those two. Like I feel a lot better about those chances with those two in. Containing, stopping the run, stopping the tight end pass. Like I feel like Buffalo has pretty better odds than it might feel like. And I mean, in the Broncos game, like it's very rare that you're going to find pure domination in 1.5 of football. But like that was the second half. They dominated offensive line, defensive line, secondary receivers. Like Josh Allen, it didn't matter. Like that was an incredible showing.
Oh yeah, and the way I always think about it when it comes to who actually has a handle on the game, it all starts and ends in the trenches, and things were going so well in that regard for Buffalo that A, there were no signs of it slowing down, and B, in the case that okay, all of a sudden now the ball has to be in Josh Allen's hands for us to win this game. Okay, fine. Like stop James Cook. Okay, let Josh do it. And that's what happened on that 4th and 1, 4th and 2. Oh, Josh will just roll right, literally stop running and just throw across the middle of the field into the end zone, 30 yards to Ty Johnson, the third string running back, nonetheless. And that was how I thought about it. If you're not going to stop our first layer of attack, if you will, then we'll just bring on the onslaught after that if you are going to stop it. So I wasn't really worried throughout this game. And the other talking point that I thought was the biggest coming out of this game was Bo Nix's performance specifically, because he was graded highly by PFF. I think he got like an 85.4 grade or something, which was pretty high, which I disagreed with, and a lot of people did. But, did you think he played bad? Did you think Sean Payton kind of held him back with the play calling at the end of the game? That was a big conversation.
Yeah. I think he was okay, especially to start off the game. He had a few throws that probably kept him up, like got him some really good points. Mm-hmm. There were some drops for sure that a couple Broncos receivers, especially Sutton was off. Mm-hmm. He made one good grab early and then was off. So he wasn't doing his normal thing. I thought Bo Nix played a good first half of football relatively for what he has. I think Sean Payton plays to Bo's strengths as a in structure only, ball out quick, confident deep shots, but anything other and in between, it's really not Bo's game yet. Not to say he can't get there, but yet. And when you're playing from behind like they got, you have to go in between. And that's kind of where we kind of saw him fall apart. At least we saw him fall apart. I guess PFF didn't. But it just really didn't seem like he had it in that second half. So, yeah, I definitely disagree with that PFF rating. I'm not a PFF grader. I don't know what I would give him, but it certainly would not be anywhere near what Josh Allen was that game. Oh, I do feel for him. He didn't have everything go his way in terms of actually catching the ball or separating or having a run game. And he had a few good runs himself in garbage time, it felt like. But, yeah, they just – again, when I say a team just wasn't equipped to beat another team, the Broncos were just not equipped to beat Buffalo. And it showed so badly once the scripted play calling goes away. And it comes to situational late game football, that's where they fell off.
Yeah, and that was what people were kind of upset about. Let Bo loose was something that I saw people say, and it's so much deeper than that. I would like to imagine Sean Payton has earned the trust of everybody when it comes to how much he knows Bo Nix and how much he understands how to put him in successful situations. And he even said after the game, we had a game plan and we just didn't execute it well enough. And you can hypothetically just let the game plan, let go of the game plan because of the script. But, then what happens to Bo Nix? How bad do the wheels fall off then if you're all of a sudden just letting him take pure drop back after pure drop back? You still got to keep him on a leash. You still got to keep him in structure to what he's used to, before you just, cut him loose. So I really didn't think Sean Payton deserved too much flack because A, they weren't coming back, and B, it all comes down to, keeping your quarterback in the most friendly environment for him. And he did that and it just didn't work out. And that's the reality of it. That's right.
Yeah. When you have Bo Nix, Javonte Williams in pure pass pro, they have McLaughlin who had 2 carries the entire game.
Yeah.
Audric Estime, that's not a playoff winning offense, like I was saying before. Especially against Buffalo, I think they started off with a good game plan. They stuck to it, and it worked for a while. The red zone defense was pretty good. They had the right process, but they just didn't have the playmakers that Buffalo had that game. I mean, the Curtis Samuel touchdown was awesome.
Yeah.
The Johnson touchdown was awesome. On Surtain too, I guess, kind of the Samuel one was. Yeah. So he was there.
Yeah.
You can say it was on Surtain if you want.
Oh, yeah. Agenda push. Bills fans have been pushing that agenda. Oh, yeah. Christian Bedford, no all-pro, but look at the supposed best corner in football getting cooked by Curtis Samuel. It's Jesus.
Yeah.
But, I that's really all it came down to. Is just it was a mismatch. The Bills did what they had to do, and I think it was close for a little bit, but I do think they had a handle on it through and through, and I would imagine there was I would say there was zero panic, zero worry in the Bills locker room going into halftime. They knew what was going on.
Yeah. And I think like one thing with the expanded playoff that we've kind of seen is there's a lot more like one-sidedness in terms of just like roster build that we can see like in the games, like especially in Philly versus Green Bay. Like it seemed like one roster was just clearly better than the other one. And one thing I was actually want to ask you about that game was like, how much of that do you think was on Jordan Love, or do you think Philly just came to play?
So yeah, good segue, by the way.
I was thinking about it for the last 5 minutes.
That was good. Yeah. So to me, I don't think that was too much on Jordan Love. I think Jordan Love didn't play well. It was kind of like a Justin Herbert situation.
Yeah.
He did not play well. A quarterback of their caliber, you would expect to make a play or two more that would be like, keeping them in it or giving them an extra chance. But neither of them really did that. Maybe the lad touchdown for Herbert's case. But for Jordan Love, it really just went downhill so fast. They were down 7 points on a drive. They were supposed to get the ball because, on the kickoff, and all of a sudden they don't have the ball. Like it just started off so bad. They didn't have Christian Watson, which, shout out Theo Ash for at least putting on my awareness scale of how impactful that was going to be for them. And, not only did they not have him, but they lost Elton Jenkins like 2 drives in. That was probably the second biggest loss outside of like Jordan Love that they probably could have suffered in that game. And then from there on out, I mean, the Eagles were on autopilot. It wasn't even like they were there. It was just, put the cap over the top, stop the run, and get pressure with 4 guys, which they were able to do. PFF charted Philadelphia with 1 blitz all game. They got pressure with 4 guys. I think Love finished with like 15 pressures against. And as long as they didn't let anything over the top and they stopped the run and they forced Love, into passing situations, he just had no shot. I mean, Romeo Doubs was pretty much eliminated, and then he got hurt. Jaden Reed, who's been a weird case this year, pretty non-impactful. Love ended up finishing 3 for 10 for 58 yards and 3 picks on passes just 10 plus yards down the field. And, not good, but once again, the Eagles blitzed just one time. And I think that just speaks to the impact of the Elton Jenkins injury because of how much pressure Jalen Carter and, all those guys up front were able to generate. What chance did they have?
That's what I just keep trying to say is like at a certain point, like obviously they could have played a better game plan. Obviously, some of the picks were really bad, like the one that Zach Bond got. Oh, it was just a misread. Like he just didn't see him, or he thought he could fit the window. I don't know. But I mean, they played good defense generally. I mean, they didn't even have Jair Alexander, who's arguably like maybe probably their second best defender behind McKinney at this point. But like they played a good fundamental game, and like it felt like they were almost still in it until the murder scene that happened against Carrington Valentine by Dallas Goedert. And like I hate to see a former classmate of mine just get beat up, but like he tried. That's what I can tell. Like,
did you hear what Goddard said after the game?
No.
He said he slowed down to give him an extra stiff arm. I mean,
that's horrible.
That's what I mean when they like were playing on autopilot. They literally like didn't. I don't want to say they didn't give a shit, but it felt like they just didn't. Like they were going through the motions, and it was enough because of how depleted the Packers were on offense. And
like, they didn't.
There was no pass rush either. I mean, there was 0 pass rush on the part of Green Bay, which also made the life of Jalen Hurts very easy. And you said that briefly earlier. He had like 130 passing yards. Like he didn't have to do anything.
No. And like I wasn't like overly moved by his performance by any means. I mean, and like I've had a lot of Philly fans come after me for the words I've said about Justin Herbert. So like now would be a good time to apologize for that. But like I'm not going to at all. Like I'm still not moved. I need to be moved more. Like AJ Brown read more pages than he had yards on the sideline. Like I don't know what was happening. Like aside from the Goddard play, like the offense aside from Saquon wasn't moving. Green Bay was missing some key players. Like they weren't moving. So like I wasn't moved by Philly's offense. It was just what the defense was doing to Green Bay's offense was murder. Like they could not do anything. It was just like the DBs, the pass rush. Nolan Smith looked fantastic.
Yeah.
Like he looked incredible. Like, and he was one of the one guys where, you know, he had potential and like you just haven't really quite seen it yet. So if he's going to show up as this like all pro level edge rusher all of a sudden in the playoffs, like it's going to be a hard time for anyone to move the ball on them in the playoffs. So that's a team I would be scared to play with Saquon and that defense.
Was it Zach Tom he turned around too? I think it was Zach Tom he beat pretty bad. Which
and Tom's good.
Yeah, Zach Tom is like very good. And if no one's doing that, one of the supposedly, you know, roughest edge rushers, if you will, for Philadelphia, then it's like it's just not your day. And you know, I am afraid of Philly, or I would be, generally speaking. I guess the one thing that I am just not sold on is I don't think they really were, I guess, trying. They weren't putting too much effort in. The game plan was very minimalistic. That's even a word. It was just run with Saquon, protect the ball, and let the defense do the work. But when have we seen this year this offense just turn it on when they have to? Like, what happens when Jalen Hurts does have to drop back in a pressure situation? Like, I do not have faith that if Saquon's getting stuffed at the line of scrimmage, that they can all of a sudden just turn a gear and, you know, all of a sudden become this high-powered attack. Like, I don't think they have that, which is what worries me. So as much as they were kind of coasting through this Packers game, I don't think they can just be like, okay, time to play.
Yeah.
And then it works.
Yeah. Like, as fun as it would be to imagine the team just stopping a 2,000-yard rusher, like, that's part of their game plan. I get it. But, like, as you said, like, it can happen. And it's happened before this season when they might, even if it's working, even if if it's a close game and they're losing, you can't be running the ball the whole time. So I've watched a lot of Jalen Hurts this season because I want to be proven wrong. I don't ever want to be down on a player. I always want to have a positive opinion. But in situations where it's just like a regular shotgun snap, drop back, no play action, no run, it's a questionable product. Like when the first read's not there, maybe if he has two high safeties and he can't just throw up the moon ball to AJ Brown, like making a short read, it's a hard thing for him to do. And I don't remember his exact completion percentage in that game, but like it wasn't like he was just hitting every pass against Green Bay. Like he was struggling to hit passes that weren't wide open. And like I do have concerns. I'm not a Jalen Hurts hater. I want him to do well. I like him as a person, but in terms of like dropping back and making plays, we haven't really seen that at an elite level since the Super Bowl that he was in. And he played well in that, but I know he can do it, but like, it's not a thing that you can count on. And that's what I do worry about for him.
100%. And I think it was Dan Orlovsky did a breakdown or maybe Ben Solak, but he expressed Jalen Hurts' performance as, you know, he did what he could with the game plan he was given, because people were questioning, like, you know, things like you were questioning. And I think you're closer to correct than they are, to be honest. Like the timing didn't, I get he hasn't played in a few weeks too. So I'd imagine that had something to do with it, but you know, I think he completed 13 passes on 21 attempts. You know, he didn't look like things were on time. It didn't look clean for as easy as it was for them. It didn't look clean. And on top of that, I get that they didn't have to do much, but I think he had like three attempts that went farther than 20 yards. I think he attempted 2 passes in that game over 20 yards, and they had on the ground, they had just 4 carries that went over 10 yards. So like they're going to need an explosive play. Like if this is their plan going into the rest of the postseason, they're going to need explosive plays. Will that all of a sudden be something they can, like I was alluding to earlier, turn on? And in this game specifically too, like they went 2 for 11 on third down, which I did not know. And they also were 1 for 4 in the red zone, which is why the game was close. So like, just not inspiring. Like you can sit here and tell me Jalen Hurts did what he had to do, or he did what he could with the game plan. Fine. But that doesn't change the fact that this game was uninspiring from him, from Kellen Moore, from the offense's perspective, period. Like the way the Packers were boxed in, it should have looked similar to what the Bills did to the Broncos, what the Vikings just, you know, went through with the Rams. Like that was the level of game it could have been. And the Eagles just didn't put the pedal to the metal. And I think part of it is because they really don't have it to be able to.
Yeah. And like the only thing that I feel like can prove me wrong, like even in my own statement, was that they did all that and AJ Brown had 10 yards. Like you're like one of the top offensive weapons in the NFL did pretty much virtually nothing the entire game, and they still won like pretty convincingly, like very convincingly. So like if you can play a full game without one of the top receivers in the NFL doing anything, like if when he finally does do something, like they could be even a little bit scarier. But like kind of like what you were saying, like I wasn't like just that inspired, except for their defense. I'm very inspired by their defense. I love what Fangio's doing, but offensively, yeah, I was not overly inspired.
Yeah, and they'll be an interesting case study for the rest of the postseason. Like this, next week against who they get the Rams now, right?
I don't know that one.
I think they do because the Commanders get the Lions. So yeah,
yes,
they'll get the Rams. So that I mean,
that's
a game they should win. Like
I feel good about them winning that one.
100%. But
to leak my prediction early, yeah.
If Stafford comes out looking like prime Matthew Stafford, like, and Jalen Hurts has to go drive for drive, or has to put together a late drive to put up some points, like they're going to be tested a lot more than they were. So it's going to be It's going to be tough for me to come out with a conclusion on that one. As much as I do want to just stamp the Eagles win on this one, the Rams, like this is not the craziest path for the Rams. So who knows? Who knows what that?
No. But I mean, like, I don't think that he was even the most inspiring quarterback in his conference. Like, I think that Jaden Daniels was
now you're showing off. Now you're showing off the segues. Now you're showing off.
Dude, I think that he was inspiring. That was a very inspiring game from Jaden Daniels.
Oh man, I mean, I saw the question posed on my timeline watching the Monday night game. Like, is Jaden the best rookie quarterback ever? Or did he have the best rookie quarterback season ever? And obviously the first thing that comes to my mind is CJ Stroud just last year was phenomenal. Like he was so, the way he was throwing that football around, just so gifted. The way I always explain it, he's just so aesthetically pleasing as a passer. Yeah. So clean, so slick. The ball comes out so nicely. The spiral's tight. It's always right where it needs to be. At least that was the case last year.
Yeah.
But Jaden this year has been just, you can't encapsulate the season he's had by the statistics or by the numbers that we've seen from him, because they just don't do it justice. And I think it was Ted Wynn that put it best. There have been so many plays this season that have altered the course of the Commanders' year, where Jaden has taken what is seemingly a negative play and somehow turned it into a positive. Like, no matter how bleak a play seems to get, it's never dead with Jaden. It's kind of that Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, dare I say, aspect, Patrick Mahomes even. And I it's obviously very early to make these types of claims, but that's the type of juice he has. Like, no play is ever dead with him. And it's led to so many game-changing plays, such as the one that closed out this wild card game against the Bucs. Kalijah Kancey had him dead to rights in the backfield. I mean, the screenshot of Kancey standing right next to him and the caption saying, "This resulted in a Commander's first down," is just so funny to me, because that is the Jaden Daniels effect in a nutshell, in a screenshot.
Yeah, he's took his towel. It's all he could grab.
Yep.
Of a allegedly 210-pound man. I think he's even thinner than that. Like a 290-pound Kalijah Kancey could not even touch him. And it was just incredible. And like, I think the one thing, I love scouting prospects, but like the one thing it's hard to scout is just like their football brain. Like, how willing to game are they? And Jaden Daniels is up for any challenge. Like, he does not care. 3rd and long, he will sling it. Any window he has to scramble, he's running, and he will get demolished. And he will get back up. He does not care. Like, he got hit sticked once in that game that like we like even talked about as it happened. He got blown up. Like, he left his feet. His feet were over his head, and like he just kept going. Like he was I believe their leading rusher for the game.
Yeah, that Jaden Daniels carried the load, against the Buccaneers. And I think I saw a stat that said the Bucs had the highest passing success rate. I'll have to find it after the fact of any losing team in a playoff game, like in history. Like the Bucs, did not play bad, and Jaden Daniels just still made play after play when it was needed. Like a couple fourth down conversions that were huge when they were trailing. There was a play early on that stuck out to me too. It was like 3rd and 6 on their own 12-yard line. He got flushed out of the pocket to his right. The play looked dead, but he's able to find Zach Ertz's crossbody in the middle of the field for a conversion. That drive ends up being a 92-yard touchdown drive. Like, not a lot of quarterbacks are converting that, let alone continuing the drive and it leading to 7 points. So that is just Jaden Daniels. He's just got ice in his veins. Like, so much as that term is thrown around, that is Jaden. He's just not affected by the pressure of the moment. And we can even go back to I think the first sign of this characteristic for him was against your Bengals, where that throw to Terry up the sideline. I mean, holy shit. I lost my shit. I could not believe that got caught. He got that ball off so perfectly under that pressure. The zero blitz came in, and I think he got smoked, if I remember properly.
He did. Yep.
And he laid that in a bucket.
Yep. I was there. Since. Oh, yeah. Oh. Yeah. Have you ever been to a home game where the opposing team doesn't punt?
No.
Have you been to 2 in the same season? Because I just did. I went to that game and the Eagles game. Neither of them punted the entire game. No punts or turnovers. It was awful. But so I have seen firsthand with Terry, with the Terry McLaurin, Jaden Daniels connection is. It's disgusting and I hate it. But I love watching it. And this is kind of going back to I love Jaden Daniels, but going back to the Herbert Jordan Love thing. This is the first time where a QB lost a playoff game in Baker Mayfield, and no one really blamed him.
Yeah.
He played hard, he made good throws, but they just lost. And they just got outplayed by someone who just played better. Mm-hmm. And Jaden Daniels just played better.
Yep. It was that simple. The better quarterback won. That it came down to the better quarterback. Baker made one more mistake that ended up being, in my opinion, the deciding factor in the game. And when you're going toe-to-toe with a superstar like Jaden Daniels, that's one mistake you can't make because they will capitalize, and all of a sudden you're packing your bags. So you hit the nail on the head with that.
It's one thing we were talking about during the game too was this going for it on 4th downs that they kept doing in very, very easy field goal situations. I know something was wrong with Jenkins. He kept fixing his hair and his shoes and his socks. Something was mentally off with him and he couldn't get comfortable. So maybe that was just a thing that he told his coach, please don't make me kick. I would rather please, I'm not ready for a playoff game right now. I don't know. I wasn't there. But they left 6 points on the board from going for it twice. And they didn't get 2 of them. They ended up getting the touchdown though, and that ended up winning them the game. So as angry as I was for a while, as I was rooting for the Commanders, they ended up making up for it.
Yeah, and advanced analytics will, of course, the ESPN go for it meter, whatever it is that Seth Walder always tweets out. They always favor in those situations going for it, but and I'm usually in favor of whatever that thing says, and not just because it's the analytics, but it usually makes sense. But given the one time they went for it that I was just so mad about was at the top of the 4th quarter. They're down 17-13. They're 10 yards out, 8 yard, maybe. Nah, they were not 10 yards out. They were closer than that. But nonetheless, they decide to go for it on 4th and goal. And at that point, possessions are at such a premium in the 4th quarter. If you don't convert that, you are all of a sudden putting so much pressure on your defense to make a stop where, they could allow a field goal. You're down 7. That's probably what they were thinking. But in the case that Baker drives the field, the way he was playing, the way him and Mike Evans were connecting, it very easily could have been a touchdown drive. And then all of a sudden you're down, what's the math on that? Why can't I do math? 4 + 7, 11 points. You're all of a sudden down 11 points halfway through the 4th quarter when if you take your field goal, you could only be down 8, and it's still a 1 possession game. So, I thought it was very reckless. It was very Dan Campbell-like. I know the Commanders have been doing it, at their own rate this season, and it's been very successful for them. But in that moment, I think they got lucky that Baker fumbled. If Baker doesn't fumble, I do think they lose that game.
Yeah, it was a weird play call too. Like that's a hard ball handling moment for a quarterback to do, to catch it, turn around to McMillan. Like that's a tough, like very precise timing based play that they've done a lot. And like Liam Cohen asked a lot of that team, but they usually deliver. And like the one thing that they were delivering on that made me happy, very happy, was Mike Evans torching Marshawn Lattimore for like a good majority of the game. Because Mike Evans has been on the wrong side of that.
Yeah.
Like more often than not. Usually he leaves because they fight. So like I was really happy to see him make those plays, that seed in the end zone. That was just like a perfect ball right to Mike Evans. Like he couldn't stop him for a majority of the game, which is why I was so surprised like they didn't score more points. Because it felt like every time they tried to go to him, like it was there like the entire game.
Yeah, and especially later on too, when Bucky started to get going, it seemed like it was going to go in Tampa's favor for a lot of that second half, and that was why I was so confused with the decision to go for it. And then, they tried to fire a dart to Ertz up the seam, and it just wasn't there. And the play call was questionable. The decision to go for it was questionable. And it's like at that point, I as a Commanders fan was feeling like, oh shit, like this ain't good. And they catch a massive break. So that is one of those moments where I would like the thought process of we're going for it in any sort of 4th and goal or any sort of 4th 2, 3, 4 thought process to just ground itself a little bit and understand the entire situation and the way the other team is moving the ball right now and what could happen if they do go down. And even if they kick a field goal, the drive will take 8 minutes, 6, 7, 8 minutes, and all of a sudden how many possessions are left in the game at that point. So it's like I know a lot of people make this reference, but when you play Madden a lot, which I have in my life, you think about these things. Like possessions are so important. Like I've played a very small amount of competitive Madden and I suck at it because it's just such a different game, but it's so possession based. It's like people are so careful about when they score with how much time is left on the clock because they understand that they don't want to give their opponent another chance right before halftime, or they'll do everything they can to not get a first down on a 2nd and 9 because they want to be able to get that first down the next play, which therefore wastes more time. It's like that's the kinds of things that you have to think about that I just don't think gets factored into the 4th down ESPN analytical model that matters in my opinion.
And that's what being a head coach is to me, is everyone talks about these great football minds that they think can take over. Everyone talks about the Ben Johnsons of the world, like they think can become great head coaches, and he might be able to. But that's what becoming like a really good head coach that the Andy Reids of the world do, is while being like an elite football mind. Like you rarely ever see the Chiefs on the wrong side of game management. Like you barely ever saw the Patriots with Bill Belichick on the wrong side of clock management. Like being a head coach is managing the game and not just coordinating the game. And that's something that I really wish I saw more from, but I also can really appreciate how aggressive they were being. And that's 2 parts of playoff football. You can play it safe, and if you lose, you go home and everyone's calling for you to be fired.
Yeah.
Or you can be aggressive and you lose and everyone calls for you to go be fired. But like, you can at least feel like you did everything you did to win. And they did. They did everything they possibly could to win, and they did. So like, I'm really happy to see where they go next week.
Yeah, that they're not going to go down, they're not just going to lay down against Detroit. I think, this was the way Jaden Daniels is playing right now. This is not a good draw for Detroit. Like it could have been easier for them with the way he's playing, the way that Cliff has this offense in a rhythm. Apparently the way Diami Brown is, suddenly a factor. It's like all of these guys are coming out of the woodwork as good players because of the way Jaden is elevating them. So I am going to pick the Lions, but
right.
Who knows?
I know.
Who knows?
Well, we've seen Detroit in like really meaningful games already. In one where they had to battle the Vikings for the number 1 seed, because that apparently was a huge deal. And like the Lions can play a good quarterback, and I'm excited. It'll be a lot better game than I think a lot of us are thinking. I don't really know what the spread is on that game. I think you said it before.
I think it came out at 8.5.
8.5.
8.5. I think it came out as, yeah.
That's steep for a playoff game, especially like round 2. So like there's expectations for the Lions to kill them, but like I think that like I don't think Daniels is ever out of it. I'm so stoked.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be a fun one. And on that same note, speaking about Detroit against good quarterbacks and good offenses, we saw them kind of throw off, poor old Sam Darnold 2 weeks ago. That was a red flag for poor Sam. But we came to find out that red flag was, planted pretty steep in the ground. It led to more of a telling story. And this week against the Rams in their wild card game, it was just a collapse. I mean, I don't really know how deep we can get into this other than like Sam just collapsed.
And you stole my segue. I was working on that one for so long.
Sorry. I know.
No, I appreciate a good segue all day long. But like that's literally what it was. It was the exact same thing that we saw against Detroit. And it wasn't necessarily the same amount of missed passes that we saw against Detroit, but it was this really weird hesitation that he seemed to have all game. And I know there's always the Sam Darnold seeing ghosts, or the Sam Darnold out indefinitely with mononucleotides. Like those are my 2 favorite things in the world. But like it was true. Like they did not look like a playoff quarterback, and that's something that I didn't expect. Like it looked like every time he went to throw the ball, he thought about it. I don't know if anyone else like really caught that, but like every time like he looked at a read and he felt ready, he would kind of just clutch and he's like, I don't know, like it might get picked off, and then it was a collapse. Like he did not look confident. He didn't look tough. Like he didn't look ready. It was just a collapse of the year.
Yep. That's really the easiest way to put it. He looked frantic. It's like just even when the pocket was like the offensive line, it was pointed out by the broadcast team a couple times. They didn't play great, but this is a guy that has been very poised all season long. He's played composed. He's been on time. And he's in fact been good under pressure a lot of the time. So it's just been such a sad downfall for these last couple of weeks with how the pressure has gotten him. And there was a throw that he actually completed in this game to Jefferson, I think, where he probably could have just like shuffled forward in the pocket and stepped up and drilled it. I think it was like the 3rd and 14 where they actually moved the chains, and it was a nice throw, but he like full on sprinted into the pocket and chucked it. Like, dude, just shuffle and step up and make your routine throw. Like it. Yeah. And that was when the word frantic popped in my mind. That's just the way he was running around the pocket, constantly looking left to right between trying to go through his progression, probably not even reading the field while doing so. If his first read was taken away, it's like the first read was gone. There wasn't a progression after that. It was just, oh my God, like what's open? What's next? Like, maybe the head is going in the proper direction in terms of the progression, but he probably isn't even registering what he's seeing because he's just freaking out.
He's freaking out. Yeah. But and that's the exact opposite of what Stafford was doing. And that's kind of where you see that gap of talent levels in quarterbacks. Because it's kind of felt all year, like from like the small amount of QB rankings I've seen, they weren't too that far off from each other. Like people would have Stafford and Darnold around the 10 mark all year long. But like when you see these playoff games, like Stafford usually got the ball out before he's even done with his drop back. Like he was so crisp against these blitzes that Flores was trying to bring at him. And they like, at least for a good first half of the game, like they had no answer for Stafford. And it was like Tyler Higbee of all people that was like actually like showing up, and like it wasn't Puka. He was like 45, 50 yards. Like it wasn't Curly Cooper Cup. He had maybe one catch. Like it was everybody. Like it was Stafford. and they were just outclassed, out-experienced, like out-confidence is really kind of like what it felt like.
Yep. One team, well, we'll say one guy had been there before compared to another guy who hadn't. And it showed, like you said, Stafford knew where the ball had to go. Like he knew, especially down the stretch, like Brian Flores doesn't have a choice. He's going to send every hat he has at me. Stafford doesn't care. He knew how to go against the blitz. That was good, right? And he knew where the ball had to go. And, you know, even if the ball wasn't the best, like the one he threw up to Kupp, you know, his guy still went and made a play on it because the ball was still there. It was still, you know, in the vicinity, which is all you really need to do when you have that many guys coming at you. Let your playmaker go and get it. So, yeah, it was just you can see the preparation difference as well. Like, you know, the Rams were prepared for the run. They got them off schedule pretty quickly. All of a sudden, there's no more play action threat. All of a sudden, there's no, you know, dig over the middle for 15 yards because, you know, the second level is jumping up trying to get to Aaron Jones. Like once that was all taken away, it was like, you know, it was over. And Darnold just could not. You just couldn't do it. That's all it was.
And that sucks because like he is one person that beat every allegation against him. It felt like this year was like he's finally like done seeing ghosts. Like he had his crucifix. Like he was not frightened whatsoever. He's back. He has holy water. Like he is just slinging bombs. Jefferson had a great year. Addison had a great year. Like he was spreading the wealth evenly, and like everything was so crisp all year long. Like he looked like what Stafford was doing earlier in the year. Yeah. Like ball out on time, like crisp, good decision making. And then I don't understand what happened to him the last 2 weeks, but it was just it's more than the line. We've seen bad offensive line performances in close games. Like as a Bengals fan, I had to see what Joe Burrow did in the Super Bowl run where he was sacked, I believe, 8 times, maybe 9 times against the Titans. And they were still like able to not fully collapse offensively and they won the game. Like you can overcome it. And I understand some of it can be to their blame, but to lose that uncompetitively to a team you were supposed to beat pretty bad is like that's a bad sign of keeping Darnold as your QB going forward.
Well, yeah, and that's the big question now. And that was a question they even were asking at halftime. Like, you know, what does this mean for Darnold's future? And it's crazy that that's even a talking point at halftime of a playoff game. Like, oh, all of a sudden, what does this mean for the possible extension of Sam Darnold? It's like the fact that that's even a question right now is just speaks to the state that the game was in. And it, you know, and you said it best. It sucked. Like for a guy that had beaten all the allegations, had seemed to turn his career around. Like, what does this mean? And, you know, it complicates. It was already a complicated situation. It gets, I want to say it gets more complicated, but I also want to say that I think this probably will mean that the number that Sam will be looking at will be pretty close to the same across the board from, you know, teams competitively looking to bring him in and what the Vikings might be offering him. Like, I can't imagine teams are going to really outbid the Vikings, you know, probably low ballish offer because of what they saw from Sam. Like at this point now, Sam is no more than a bridge. He went from potentially being, you know, the Baker Mayfield answer that the way he turned his career around to being just maybe a bridge. So, and that contract could look very, very, the contracts he could be offered outside of Minnesota could end up being similar to what he gets in Minnesota. And maybe that leads to him staying.
Yeah. And to me, it just kind of comes down to like, what's the incentive for Minnesota to keep him when you have such a talented, I believe pretty talented quarterback in McCarthy. And it comes down to a decision of not even like what's your future, but like, what do you gain from letting one of them walk? So if you do keep Darnold, you get really good assets from McCarthy. And I'm not entirely sure what the asking price for McCarthy is, but he was a first round pick and he looked good in preseason. So I'd imagine pretty similar and maybe more. So it could come down to that, or it could come down to not wanting to pay Darnold I looked it up earlier, projected 35 to 40 million, which sounds about right that he could probably be asking for from these QB needy teams. And it might just have to be that you go with the guy that you drafted in the first round that looked pretty good. But it's just like another question of like, you haven't seen enough, but you might not have seen enough of Darnold to really know that he's your guy going forward. So like, that's not a spot that I necessarily want to be in, but it's not the worst thing ever. Like, I think that, like, I personally am a McCarthy believer. I think that he should be the guy going forward as a much cheaper option. But like, yeah, like, I can't say it more. Like, I feel so bad for Darnold because I think now this means he's going to a Oakland or a Pittsburgh, not Oakland, Jesus, Vegas. How old am I? Yeah, like, but yeah, like, yeah, it's just, I don't want this to be his only year of like proper like production, but it looks like it has a chance to be that.
Yeah. I think I'm there with you. I can't see a universe where Darnold is, I guess, brought back. Like, if he does end up returning to Minnesota, I would imagine it would be on a basis of your leash is like super short. Like, you got to show us that you can play at the level you were playing at for a long time. And, you know, even the second you drop the ball and it costs us big time, then, you know, you're pulled. Like, maybe that will be the contingency he's brought back on. Maybe another QB. I mean, the draft class being weak is going to play to his advantage severely.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody will end up swinging on him because he did show some promise. But I guess, you know, conversely, if he collapsed like this in the Kevin O'Connell Minnesota Vikings environment, like if enough franchises that are QB needy can be realistic, like, are they going to be, is he going to be somehow more consistent or, you know, just as consistent even in your offense without Kevin O'Connell? Like, I don't know how self-aware some of these franchises really are. Probably not self-aware enough to make that judgment. But yeah, I do have to agree. McCarthy is got to be, you know, where you go just because of how you spend so much capital on him. You know, I would doubt that anyone's going to reach out with, you know, for that much capital at this point for him because they know how steep the price would be. So I think McCarthy's got to be the move.
I think so too. And like, to your point, like from the teams that could be calling for Darnold, like a Tennessee, a Cleveland, a Pittsburgh, I don't see it working out in any of those as a fraction of what he did in a Kevin O'Connell offense. And that's why I was just so sad to see this end this way, was just like an utter collapse. Because that ruined his heart, that ruined my heart for him, that ruined every Vikings fan's heart, or anyone, Colin Cowherd especially. Oh my God, I bet he's in shambles. So like, that's just like the one part where football gets sad. Just seeing a guy that like finally had his shot and maybe blew it. Maybe. We don't know yet, but maybe blew it.
So, yeah, I mean, on that same note, there are a lot of other questions to ask going into the divisional round that don't even pertain to the playoffs with coaches, with Mike Vrabel being hired, Todd Bowles potentially being on the hot seat. You have Mike McCarthy being out in Dallas. So many questions with coaches, and we can see a lot of turnover, which is exciting for the sake of content, not so exciting for the sake of some people's jobs, but it is a big bone to start chewing on. So we'll save that for the second episode, which you can expect Friday morning. We're definitely going to indulge in our predictions for the divisional round, but also a lot of coaching carousel conversation. So tune in for that. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, share with anybody you know. This is going to be a very, very fun, very, very entertaining, informative show going forward. And I hope you got that same sense from listening to episode 1. So, Austin, if you have any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I loved it. And that's just like a thank you to anybody that took any amount of time to listen, especially if I sent you. There should be plenty more. This is the first round. Any improvements, let us know. But overall, felt good. And I'm really, really excited to get into coaches because I have a lot of thoughts. And it might go even longer. So strap in.
Yeah, we'll try not to rot your ears for too long because this one probably could have went for a lot longer than whatever it's going to end up being post-editing. So thank you for watching, and we will see you guys Friday morning.